I'm so flattered to be guest 100. That's really awesome. When I think about, Alex's story, it obviously has such weight. Stepping out of line was like life or death. It's a hugely significant thing. So I don't want to compare, any of my stepping out of line with obviously something like that. But I left the industry to go to college, and like that was a really, kind of a big deal. But I think that I wouldn't use that as my kind of stepping out of line. What I did after I got my degree was I didn't continue in the field that I was trained in. I got a doctorate in neuroscience, and I love doing research, and I worked with individuals with special needs, and I loved what I did. But I had a very strong desire to be a mom and to be home with my kids. I had had my first son when I was in graduate school, and then I had my second son right after I got my degree. The reason I think that's my example of kind of stepping out of line is, nobody really thought that was a good idea. It had a lot of consequences, meaning it meant that I likely wouldn't be able to get a job, in the field that I was in at the place that I was in life. It meant that I was going to be stepping out of the kind of job where you have to stay up on research and you have to be going to conferences and, you're part of like a whole neuroscience community. And I couldn't do those things at the same time. I mean, at that time, I wasn't acting. I was removing myself from the prospect of a career, of earning potential, that was going to be like my job and my life. I still managed to do other things in neuroscience. I taught junior high and high school. I designed a curriculum for homeschool kids, which was a much more flexible schedule, and I could kind of set my own schedule. But I was really stepping out of, the world of like, women can do it all, and we can have these jobs, and it was amazing, and I believe all those things. But when it came down to it, I had to do what I felt was right. Even my mom, for example, while she's supportive of everything I do, like I'm sure, she was right to say like, really? You're gonna, have that kind of pivot? And the fact is, I was not independently wealthy at that time in my life where I could do that without there being a risk. It was a risk of like, what's going to happen. And I really didn't know. I was young. I had two kids, and I did have a past, but I never thought I'd get on another TV show again, and I might not have. I could have not gone on the Big Bang Theory audition. I had two little kids at that time too. So it's not like I had my life lined up for me. I think that would kind of be my moment.
I don't think women can have it all because someone always suffers.
I think it's true for everyone. I want to say that like men have that too, where like you can't do two things at once, and but the fact is like because of the role that many of us take on as moms or even as caregivers, we're often the ones in our family that do a lot of stuff. There's a certain set of decisions that are different for men and women. And I know it's kind of a gendered thing to say, but women, for all of human history, we tend to be we're the caregivers, we're the ones taking care of kids and older people and, being the talkers and the facilitators. And those are things that are in us that I think in many cases, still hold true. We're often the ones in the home.
You seem to have been able to keep a spiritual awareness, and your identity is very strong. How hard has that been in the industry that you're in? Because I'm sure you missed out on a lot.
I definitely think that there's obviously a lot of Jewish people that work in Hollywood and in the industry, but not a lot of people, who are observant, or not a lot of people who really want to like talk about spiritual or God things. I think it's becoming more accepted now, now that people are talking about like, oh, I need a break from my phone. And, Jewish people are like, we take a break every week. You can take a break. You can turn off whatever device you want. So it's kind of interesting. More and more people are talking about the need for the kind of separation that I think, our religious tradition and our, kind of cultural tradition has built in. I've never felt like ashamed to talk about it, but I definitely, for anyone who observes Jewish holidays, like the fall is a mess because there's like a holiday every week, and sometimes it's 2 days, and it goes on, through Sukkot and all this stuff. It's definitely a challenge in that sense, but there's a a lot of value that I find in the rituals, of my people. I like having a different calendar, especially because like the Jewish calendar is very connected to the seasons, in a way that feels really meaningful to me. That kind of religious life is very close to me also, even though I wasn't raised religious. I took on more observance in college. My grandparents are immigrants, my mom's parents were Orthodox, and I grew up with Yiddish, and I grew up with a tremendous amount of the memories and, in many cases, the challenges of World War II and of the Holocaust. So I was raised with a very heavy consciousness of like a responsibility, to be a light among nations, whatever that looks like.
Speaking about Yiddish, what is your favorite Yiddish word?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to pick just one. Yiddish absolutely is a language, that has words for things that often take a paragraph to explain, in
Right.
English. And so, I have obviously there are words that just like sound fun to say, but there is a favorite word of mine, and I guess I'll pick it as my favorite. The word is verschimmelt, and that is the word for like when a fruit is like overripe but not mushy, but it's like mealy and watery and like doesn't taste like the fruit. That word is verschimmelt.
Oddly enough, you think you'd be better at picking your fruit mind because you don't eat meat or chicken.
That's right. But sometimes like you think you get a good one and then you bite into it and like instead of having to explain all the things I just explained, you say like, ugh, this is verschimmelt.
I hope you don't do that in the fruit aisle like older people do and you take it home.
No, I do
Hey,
good at home.
and what's your word? Verklempt. And I like the pits.
For Verklempt and for pits, they go together.
After Perry and I saw the TikTok where you cried in Disney because Sadness had possibly explosive diarrhea, and you still were crying, and you were snorting and crying and laughing. And I looked at Perry and said, Perry, I know you've tried to like get in touch with this woman for years, but you have to try one more time because she's like, I totally get her.
That's what did it.
That's what did it. What was it that finally you said, that's it, I have to speak to Perry?
Jonathan Cohen,
Yes.
my partner on the podcast, I know that he had connected with you.
I didn't understand half the things he was saying and kept looking at Perry going, what?
I know.
Perry's like, shut up, Ma, I'll get it. I'll explain to you later.
We're really glad that we both could be part of this. I have a really stupid, crazy schedule. I worked on Call Me Kat for 3 years, and sitcom work is kind of like every day, all day. And then, my weeks off, I spend doing Jeopardy. I was mostly excited to finally have time that I could say, I want to talk to you and I want to be part of this incredible community that you are making.
So you have 2 boys.
They're 14 and 17.
Are you saying, yes, the entertainment industry is amazing, you should definitely do it, it'll be so wonderful for you? Or
We've kind of already had conversations about that because they both have been active in theater. And so I think people always said like, oh, are you going to get them into acting? There's a lot of things about them, I think, that are drawn to artistic expression. My younger one in particular, he really likes Shakespeare, tends to be kind of a quiet guy, but there's Shakespeare classes that he takes and he really likes to be on stage. My older one is very creative. He's very funny. I could see both of them if they wanted to getting into the industry, but I also think there's so many other fields that I think they have talents and interests in. Do I think that working in entertainment is amazing? Yes, but I feel like it's amazing in a lot of ways, not just being in front of the camera. So I think that's also a thing that like being an actor and, having to have like that front facing identity, like that's very different than say, I have friends who work as accountants in the industry. And so they're in the industry, but not having to kind of have that same, kind of things you have to worry about.
when you were a little girl, did you ever imagine that you would be at this point in your life?
The fact that, in the last few years of my life, I've gotten to host Jeopardy, which is like never, that's like literally like you would have like a dream about like, oh, in my dream I was hosting Jeopardy. Like it's so nuts. When you have a dream of like, oh, I had a dream that I
Right.
a hot dog stand. It's so far from what I thought, life would be. But I really, that's something really special in that, yes, I have this acting career, but I also, studied and was in college for, 12 years for my undergraduate and my graduate work. And so I'm a person who loves information. I love learning. It sounds like Perry does too. And to have a job where I get to like combine those, I'm an on-camera person, but I talking about, all these smart people and all these
Right.
things. Like, that's a really neat combination. I never would have imagined I could have a job like that.
What do you want to do with your life besides acting? Is there anything that you haven't done yet that you say, wow, I really want to get into it? I really want to do that?
First of all, like, I find it really inspiring, to hear all the things that Perry's doing, because, like, I think it's incredible. Many people kind of do one thing and they're happy with that, and that's great. But I admire and do feel really inspired by, the kind of mission that you're on and that your family is on, and you, Perry, in particular. Something that is extremely important to me, and it's sort of where I put a lot of my time and my brain, is into mental health advocacy. And, so the reason Jonathan and I started the podcast was because, when the pandemic started, a lot of people had all these, like, fears and anxiety and, like, what's going to happen? How long is it going to be like this? And, that anticipatory anxiety. And we felt like, gosh, this is what we're worried about. And we're people who have been to therapy, have resources for that. What about the people who don't have those resources? So, we started our podcast just as, like, a place for people to learn, a free place for people to learn the vocabulary and what does it mean to be anxious, and what happens. I answered a question today: what happens if you feel worthless or if you feel really down? Like, what do you do? So I love that I get to be part of kind of a community where people are asking those kinds of questions, and we're doing our best to provide resources. But, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in this field. When I think about how hard it is for so many people to get help that they need and get support, I think that that's something that on a government level, we should be supporting more people getting more resources for all the things they need, especially regarding mental health. So that's something I could see myself doing more of. And also, my kids are still young. So a lot of my life is also still anchored to what they need, and still needing to be home and cooking and cleaning and things like that. So my life is still a lot of laundry right now. But as they get older and start having their own dreams, I will see where my life takes me to. A lot of people think that I'm confident. And I actually suffer from a lack of confidence. And it's funny when you say, like, I'm a role model, or like I stick to my guns. And it's funny because I see those things, but I also have a lot of self doubt. I have a lot of questioning, and I worry, like, should I do this? Should I not? So I think that's something that people, wouldn't necessarily think, especially with kind of the way that I, present myself. It's not that I'm lying, but I just think there's a lot of subtlety to it, if that makes sense.
Who's your sounding board?
I have a mentor who is very, very helpful for me. She's been in my life for a long time. And she's the person, like, if I really want to, like, eliminate all the emotional worrying and want to kind of get down to, like, what's the issue, she's the person. So her name's Sean. I have some close friends that I could go to. Jonathan and I obviously talk a lot. And my therapist, I go to therapy. I believe in that very strongly. It's important to me. And so, so there's also reasoning out there that happens.
You just say, this is me, this is who I am. I mean, your podcast does talk about serious issues, but you are giggling and laughing through parts of it because you find humor in it.
I credit my parents. My father, blessed memory, was a very funny person, very charismatic. And my mom, my mom was outspoken when it wasn't, in fashion to be outspoken. And it got her into a lot of trouble in her family. She was raised very religious and she was kind of a rebel. But yeah, I was raised with a really strong female role model. And, she also was very traditional and really incredible homemaker. But, I definitely get my big mouth from her and my dad. My father was actually a public school teacher, but my parents were documentary filmmakers in the 60s and 70s. They didn't have kids for 7 years after getting married, so they had, kind of a whole life as artists and anti-war activists, and they, marched on Washington and things like that, and they made films about a lot of the things that, we're still talking about today, about, how children are harmed by war and things like that. So,
do you find from your dad anything that comforts you now because you never knew about it?
There's different perspectives, that I gain, even with time. And I think as I become a parent, I think of myself at that age and what that was like. But I was very close with my dad and did know a lot about many aspects of him that I think a lot of children often don't get the opportunity to know. I was very, very close with him. And we had 5 years where we took father-daughter road trips where we would drive pretty much, 700 to 1,000 miles a day, just drive all day and talk. So I had a lot of information about my dad. And we had some really heavy discussions, in his last year of life. So I actually talked a lot about some of the regrets he had. And so I felt really kind of full, of good information when he passed. It's obviously a journey, though. Like I said, every year it's still a reminder. I went to UCLA for undergrad and grad school. So I was born in San Diego, but raised in Los Angeles and never left. The process of getting a PhD is like such a life lesson in patience and, not quitting. I wanted to quit so many times. I was so frustrated, and graduate work is just, very tedious. I worked on Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a really special community. So I got to learn a lot about, advocacy, which you both know a lot about, and the importance also of, building a community of people who have similar needs, similar desires, and also a similar goal, like you talk about fundraising. The organization that I worked with and that, the people in my study, were part of, those are organizations that constantly need funding for research and to support families. So learning about that community was something I never expected, would be part of my graduate work. But I think that's really stayed with me. What made you want to get an MBA?
When I was in high school, I was in between Martin and becoming a lawyer. Then actually, when I went to college at Delphi, went in this professor's office to talk about how to become a lawyer, what that would entail, and the professor had very bad yes that day.
He fired up his entire office, this professor, the pre-law professor. I was with Peri because I'm acting as her nurse. I said, Peri, we cannot do pre-law and have to come to this office ever again.
So now it's like, okay, now I know I can't be a lawyer. I'm gonna be a Martin, I'm gonna MBA. That's what I always wanted in the first place.
Somebody like that, it wasn't like a random once in a lifetime fart. He obviously used that office to just gas up every day. I couldn't go back. So that determined Peri's entire life.
There it is.
It's interesting because things in her life, which I'm a part of, usually go sour very quickly. She was taking a Spanish class in a community college because we had to get rid of the language in the summer. And the teacher called me ustedes as an example. And I was so offended that I was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and it shot out of my nose in the middle of class. I said, Peri, we must leave this class. We can never come back here again. And we waived our language requirement. We never had to do it. So a lot of her life is determined by unfortunate circumstances, which I'm involved in. And I say, we can never do this again. That's why she's getting an MBA, Mayim.